Chapter 1. The Bargain. The heat rose off the Texas plains in waves thick enough to taste, dust and mesquite and something older, something mean. Charlotte Hale pressed her gloved hand to the stagecoach window, watching the land stretch out forever in every direction, flat and unforgiving under a sky bleached white by the sun. The leather of her only good dress stuck to her back. 3 days of travel had left her rumpled and road-worn, but she kept her spine straight. Dignity was free, and it was all she had left. The Stone Ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage. First came the fencing, miles of it, new barbed wire glinting like broken teeth. Then the outbuildings, dark shapes wavering in the heat shimmer. Finally, the main house rose up, a 2-story monument to prosperity that looked out of place against the raw emptiness surrounding it. White painted wood, a wraparound porch with actual turned posts, glass windows that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back like a challenge. Lottie's stomach twisted. The stage jolted to a stop in a cloud of dust that filtered through every crack and seam. She could taste it, gritty between her teeth. The driver climbed down with a grunt, and a moment later the door swung open, letting in a wall of heat that made her gasp. "Miss Hale," his voice was rough as rope, "welcome to Stone Ranch." She accepted his hand and stepped down, her boots sinking slightly into the packed earth. The wind tugged at her hat, hot and dry, carrying the smell of horses and hay and distance. In Ohio there were trees. Here there was only sky. "Your trunk, ma'am?" Lottie turned to see her father's old traveling trunk being hefted down, the one that had carried his medical books before cholera took him, before the deaths came due, before Reverend Porter's letter had arrived with its careful, pitying words about a widower in Texas seeking a wife. "A business arrangement," the letter had said. "He's a man of means and character. You'd want for nothing." Nothing except choice. The front door of the house opened, and Jeremiah Stone stepped onto the porch. He was tall, that was her first thought. Tall and broad across the shoulders, dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His face was weathered leather, lined deep at the eyes and mouth, and his hair was iron gray beneath his hat. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who had carved a kingdom out of hard country through harder work. He looked 55 years old. He looked like a stranger. Jeremiah descended the porch steps with measured strides, his boots striking wood and then earth with solid, even beats. When he stopped in front of her, Lottie had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. They were pale gray, the color of winter sky, and they studied her with the same careful assessment she'd seen men use when buying horses. "Miss Hale." His voice was rough, quiet. It didn't have to be loud. "Your journey was tolerable, I hope." "Yes, sir, thank you." A pause, heavy as the heat pressing down on them. Somewhere distant, a cow lowed. The wind gusted, rattling something metal against wood. A chain, maybe, or a loose gate latch. The sound was lonely. "I expect you'll want to refresh yourself," Jeremiah said. "Wedding set for 6 o'clock. Reverend Clay is already here. We'll keep it simple." Simple. As if marrying a man she'd never met was something that could be made simple by keeping the ceremony short. "Thank you," Lottie said again, because what else was there to say? Jeremiah gestured toward the house, and she followed, acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid, silent, separate. The porch steps creaked under their weight. The front door swung open on hinges that needed oil, a high, thin whine that set her teeth on edge. Inside, the house was cooler, but not cool. The entry hall stretched back into shadow, wide plank floors gleaming with polish, walls painted a pale cream. A staircase rose to the left, dark wood with a runner of deep green carpet that probably cost more than everything Lottie owned. To the right, she glimpsed a parlor, furniture shapes hulking under the dimness. It smelled like beeswax and tobacco and emptiness. "Mrs. Chen handles the cooking and housekeeping," Jeremiah said, his voice echoing slightly.
You'll meet her at supper. Your room's upstairs, second door on the right. I had it prepared." "Your room, not our room." "I appreciate your consideration, Mr. Stone." "Jeremiah." He turned to face her, and in the shadowed hallway his expression was impossible to read. "We'll be married in a few hours. You'd best call me by my name." She nodded, her throat suddenly tight. He studied her another moment, then gestured to a narrow woman in a dark dress who had appeared from deeper in the house, moving quiet as smoke. "Mrs. Chen will show you up. Wedding's at 6, he repeated, and then he was turning away, his boots striking the floor as he headed toward what looked like a study, leaving Lottie standing in the cool dimness with a stranger and her father's trunk and a decision already made. The bedroom was larger than the entire parlor of the Cincinnati boarding house where Lottie had spent the last 6 months. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, dark wood carved with some kind of vine pattern, dressed in white linens that looked crisp enough to crack. A wardrobe stood against one wall, a washstand with a porcelain basin against another. The single window faced west, and through it she could see nothing but land, rolling, endless, empty. Mrs. Chen had left her with a pitcher of water and a meaningful look that might have been sympathy. Lottie poured water into the basin and scrubbed the dust from her face and hands, then did her best to make herself presentable. She changed into her only other dress, dark blue wool, too heavy for the climate, but respectably made. She pinned her hair up carefully, using her mother's tortoiseshell combs. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand looked pale and serious, brown eyes too large in a thin face. "This is survival," she told herself. "This is the choice you made." At 6 o'clock exactly, there was a knock.
Jeremiah stood in the hallway, changed into a black suit coat that made him look even more imposing. His face was freshly shaved, his hair combed back. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothing, like a working man dressed for a funeral. "Ready?" he asked. Lottie nodded because her voice had gone missing. The ceremony took place in the parlor, with Reverend Clay presiding, a thin man with kind eyes and a gentle drawl who kept the service mercifully brief. Mrs. Chen and an older ranch hand named Hector served as witnesses, standing solemn-faced near the fireplace. Evening light slanted through the windows, golden and thick with suspended dust motes that drifted like snow. Lottie repeated the words when prompted. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too small for the high-ceilinged room. Jeremiah's responses were measured, steady, without inflection. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, there was no kiss. Jeremiah simply nodded once, a gesture that might have been to her or to the Reverend or to the room itself. It was done. Mrs. Chen had prepared a supper, beef and potatoes and bread that was still warm, but Lottie could barely eat. The dining room table could have seated 12 easily. She and Jeremiah sat at one end, the Reverend at the other, and the space between them felt vast as the plains outside. Conversation was sparse, polite, about weather and cattle prices, and nothing that mattered. When the meal ended, Reverend Clay excused himself to the guest room. Jeremiah rose, his chair scraping against the floor. "I expect you're tired from your journey," he said, not quite looking at her. Lottie stood as well, her hands clasped tight in front of her. "Yes, sir." "Jeremiah." He nodded, then hesitated, something flickering across his face, discomfort maybe, or awkwardness, the first crack she'd seen in his composed exterior. "Your room is prepared as you found it. I won't—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "I won't trouble you tonight, or any night, unless you give me cause to think you'd welcome it. This marriage is for practical purposes, Miss Hale. I need someone to run my household. You needed security. That's the bargain we've made." Heat flooded Lottie's face. Relief and humiliation tangled together in her chest until she couldn't tell which was which. "I understand,"
she managed. Good. Jeremiah picked up his hat from where it hung by the door. I've got work to see to in the barn. I'll bid you good night. And then he was gone, the front door closing behind him with a solid thunk that echoed through the empty house. Lottie stood alone in the dining room, still wearing her blue wool dress, still wearing her mother's combs, her wedding ring, plain gold, slightly too large, loose on her finger. Through the window, she could see Jeremiah's silhouette crossing the yard toward the dark shapes of the outbuildings, his stride purposeful, already moving away. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the smooth banister. The second door on the right opened to reveal her room exactly as she'd left it, neat, impersonal, hers by ownership, but not by choice.
Lottie closed the door behind her and stood in the center of the room, listening. The house settled around her with small sounds, wood contracting as the day's heat bled away, wind testing the eaves, somewhere distant the lowing of cattle. She went to the window and looked out at the darkening land, at the vast emptiness that was now her home, at the horizon where earth met sky in a line as sharp and unforgiving as a knife's edge. She had survived. She was fed, sheltered, safe. She had never felt more alone. Outside, a coyote called, high and wild and lonesome, and the sound carried for miles. Chapter 2. The Routine. 4 months passed like water through cupped hands. Lottie learned the rhythm of the Stone Ranch the way she'd once learned piano scales, through repetition, through discipline, through the understanding that mastery and joy were not the same thing. She woke each morning to the sound of roosters and the distant shouts of ranch hands heading out to work. She dressed in the simple calico dresses Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, more practical than the wool she'd brought from Ohio. She pinned her hair up and went downstairs to a house that gleamed with polish but echoed with emptiness. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked time with steady, mechanical patience, tick-tock, tick-tock. In the quiet of early morning, before Mrs. Chen arrived from her cottage near the barn, that clock was the only voice in the house. Lottie had learned to manage a household twice the size of any she'd known. She kept the accounts in a leather-bound ledger, her handwriting neat as stitching across the pages. Feed costs, supply orders, wages for the hands. She planned menus with Mrs. Chen, reviewed the weekly washing schedule, made sure the lamps were filled and the windows cleaned. She was confident. She was useful. She was terribly, achingly lonely. Jeremiah was not unkind. That was perhaps the strangest part of it all. He was unfailingly polite, respectful, even generous. He'd given her a household allowance that would have seemed like a fortune in Cincinnati. When she'd mentioned wanting books, he'd ordered a subscription to Harper's Magazine and had a full crate of novels shipped from San Antonio. When the October heat had finally broken and she'd shivered at breakfast, he'd noticed and had Mrs. Chen lay a fire in the parlor every evening after that. But he never touched her. They lived in the same house the way 2 guests might share a boarding house, cordial strangers passing in hallways, sharing meals in companionable silence, retiring to separate rooms when the sun went down. He rose before dawn and came in after dark, smelling of horses and leather in the outdoors. At supper, he would ask about her day with genuine interest, listening as she described the new curtains for the parlor or the problem with the kitchen stove. He would nod, occasionally comment, sometimes even smile, a quick rusty thing that looked unpracticed. Then he would thank her for the meal, excuse himself to his study, and that would be that. Some nights, lying in her large bed in her large room, Lottie would stare at the ceiling and wonder if this was what the rest of her life would look like. Safe, comfortable, correct, empty. She had not expected passion. She wasn't naive enough for that, but she had hoped for something. Partnership, perhaps. Companionship. The possibility that someday the careful distance between them might narrow. Instead, the space only seemed to widen. Breakfast was always the same. 7 o'clock precisely. The dining room tables set for 2 at one end, white linens and good china that seemed absurd for a Tuesday morning in November. Mrs. Chen would bring out eggs and bacon, biscuits with honey, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Jeremiah would sit across from Lottie, already dressed for the day's work, his hair still damp from washing. He would eat methodically, reading the week-old newspaper that came up from Austin on the Friday stage. Lottie would eat her eggs and listen to the sounds of the house settling into morning, the creak of floorboards as Mrs. Chen moved through the kitchen, the muffled sounds of ranch hands shouting to each other in the yard, the clink of silverware against porcelain. Clink, clink, clink. Such small sounds to fill such a large silence. "The Hendersons have invited us to Thanksgiving supper," Lottie said, spreading honey on her biscuit with careful precision. The Hendersons owned the neighboring ranch, 10 miles south. She'd met Martha Henderson twice at church, a round, cheerful woman with 5 children and a laugh like church bells. Martha mentioned it after services Sunday. Jeremiah lowered his newspaper, considering. "That's kind of them. We should accept. I thought I might bring a pie. Apple if Mrs. Chen can get the dried fruit from town." "Good." He returned to his paper. Lottie took a bite of her biscuit and chewed slowly, the honey suddenly too sweet on her tongue. This was how they communicated now. Brief exchanges about social obligations and household matters, each response carefully neutral, polite as strangers at a tea party. She had learned not to ask about his work beyond the most general questions. She had learned not to linger when he retreated to a study. She had learned to fill her days with tasks and her evenings with reading, and to ignore the hollow feeling that had taken up residence beneath her ribs. The sound of hoofbeats broke through the morning quiet, fast, urgent, different from the usual rhythm of ranch life. Jeremiah's head came up, his expression sharpening the way a dog's does at a distant whistle. A moment later, boots hammered across the porch, and someone knocked hard on the front door. "Boss!" The voice was young, breathless. "Boss, you home?" Jeremiah was already rising, his chair scraping back. Lottie set down her coffee cup as he strode from the room, his boots striking the floor in quick, purposeful beats. She heard the front door open, heard the murmur of male voices, one urgent, one steady. Then silence. She waited, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating harder than it should for something that was probably nothing. A problem with the cattle, most likely, or a fence down, or... Jeremiah appeared in the doorway. He held a telegram in his hand, the thin yellow paper bright against his calloused fingers. His face had gone carefully blank in the way she'd learned meant he was feeling something too large to show.
"Jeremiah?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "What is it?" He crossed to the table slowly, still reading the telegram as if the words might change if he looked at them long enough. When he finally lifted his eyes to hers, there was something in them she'd never seen before, a complicated tangle of emotions that might have been hope and dread and longing all braided together. "It's from Wyatt," he said quietly. Lottie's breath caught. In 4 months of marriage, Jeremiah had mentioned his son exactly 3 times, brief, clipped references that made it clear the subject was not open for discussion. All she knew was that there had been a fight years ago, that the boy had left, that the wound of it still hadn't healed. "He's coming home," Jeremiah continued, and his voice was rough as gravel. "Says he'll be here by week's end." The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. Mrs. Chen's footsteps paused in the kitchen, as if even the house itself was holding its breath. That's good, isn't it?" Lottie asked carefully. "You must have missed him." Jeremiah looked down at the telegram again, his jaw working. 6 years, he said, more to himself than to her. 6 years since he walked off this property swearing he'd never come back. Didn't even come home for his mother's funeral. The bitterness in his voice was startling, sharp as broken glass. It was the most emotion she'd ever heard from him. "What changed?" she asked. "Don't know." Jeremiah folded the telegram precisely, creasing the edges with care that seemed at odds with the tension in his shoulders. "Message just says he's been working ranches up north, Wyoming, Montana. Says he's ready to come home now, if I'll have him." "And will you?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment the careful distance between them narrowed. She saw something raw in his face, a father's love, complicated by hurt and pride and years of silence. "He's my son," Jeremiah said simply. "Only family I've got left." Lottie nodded, understanding the words he wasn't saying. "You're not family. You're the arrangement. He's blood. I'll have Mrs. Chen prepare the guest room, the one at the end of the hall. His old room's still there. I never—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Never changed it. Just shut the door." He stood there another moment, the telegram in his hand, a man who'd carved a kingdom out of hard country but didn't know how to navigate the territory of his own heart. Then he nodded once, that same gesture she'd seen at their wedding, acknowledgement without warmth, and turned to leave. "Jeremiah?" He paused in the doorway, not quite looking back. "I hope it goes well. His homecoming."
"So do I, Mrs. Stone." The formality of it stung, though she knew he didn't mean it to. "So do I." Then he was gone, his boots striking the floor in that steady rhythm she'd grown so accustomed to, the front door closing behind him with its familiar solid thunk. Lottie sat alone at the dining room table, her breakfast cooling in front of her. The morning suddenly changed in ways she couldn't name. Through the window, she could see Jeremiah crossing the yard toward the barn, his stride purposeful but different somehow, tighter, wound with anticipation or anxiety, or both. A son, coming home after 6 years. She thought of the big house with its echoing hallways, the careful silence that had defined her marriage, the distance she'd learned to navigate like a sailor learns to read empty horizons. Something was shifting. She could feel it the way animals sense storms, a change in pressure, a thickness to the air that meant weather was coming. The grandfather clock ticked on. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes knowing. "The young Mr. Stone is coming back," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. That's good. This house needs life in it again." She began clearing the plates, efficient and practical. "But you should know, Mrs. Stone, the boy who left was angry, very angry. People don't always come back the same as they left." Lottie watched through the window as Jeremiah disappeared into the barn, swallowed by shadow. "No," she said softly, "I don't suppose they do." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows in their frames, a sound like a warning, or a promise, or both. Chapter 3. The Return. He came on a Saturday, just before noon, when the sun was high and merciless. Lottie was in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen, reviewing the week's baking, when she heard it, the sound of a single horse being ridden hard, hoofbeats drumming against packed earth like a heartbeat coming faster. She moved to the window, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron, and looked out across the yard. The rider came through the ranch gate at a pace just shy of reckless. He sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, moving with the animal instead of against it, his body loose and easy despite the speed. Even from a distance, she could see he was tall as Jeremiah, but built leaner, rangier, all coiled muscle and restless energy. He wore dark trail clothes caked with dust, a bandana around his neck, his hat pulled low. A bedroll and saddlebags were tied behind his saddle. He looked like what he was, a man who'd spent weeks on the trail with nothing but horse and horizon for company. He looked dangerous. "The young Mr. Stone," Mrs. Chen said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "He always did ride like the devil was chasing him." Lottie watched as the rider pulled his horse up short in front of the barn, dismounting in one fluid motion before the animal had fully stopped. He pulled off his hat, slapping it against his thigh. Knocked the dust off, and she caught her first clear look at his face. Dark hair, too long and wild, a jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard, features that echoed Jeremiah's but sharper, harder, younger, handsome in a way that had nothing to do with softness or safety. Even from inside the house, she could see the way he moved, prowling, predatory, like a man always ready for trouble.
Wyatt Stone had come home. The front door of the barn opened and Jeremiah emerged, moving fast for a man his age. Lottie couldn't hear what was said, but she could see the way both men stopped a dozen feet apart, neither closing the distance. Father and son, facing each other across 6 years of silence. Jeremiah's shoulders were rigid. Wyatt stood with his weight on one hip, his hat in his hand, his head tilted at an angle that might have been defiance or defense. Then Jeremiah stepped forward and culled his son into an embrace. It was brief, a hard clasp, over almost before it started, but it was something. When they separated, Wyatt's expression was unreadable, but Jeremiah's face had transformed. He looked younger, hopeful, almost vulnerable. Lottie let the curtain fall and stepped back from the window, her heart beating strangely. "Mrs. Chen, we should add a place at dinner, and perhaps prepare some coffee now and something to eat. He'll be hungry from the road." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Chen was already moving, pulling down the good cups. "You should go freshen up. He'll want to meet his father's wife." The way she said it, his father's wife, made it sound like a challenge. Lottie was in the parlor when they came in, standing near the window with her hands folded in front of her, trying to look composed. She'd changed into her green dress, the nicest one she owned that wasn't her wedding dress, and had taken extra care with her hair. She wasn't sure why it mattered, but it did. She heard them before she saw them, boots on the porch, Jeremiah's voice low and steady, another voice answering in shorter, sharper bursts. Then the front door opened, and they were in the hallway, bringing with them the smell of horses and leather and the outdoors. "Charlotte," Jeremiah said, and there was something almost nervous in his voice. "I'd like you to meet my son. Wyatt, this is Charlotte, my wife." Wyatt Stone stepped into the parlor doorway and looked at her. The impact of his full attention was physical. His eyes were blue, not the pale gray of his father's, but a darker, stormier blue that seemed to see too much. They swept over her in a single assessing glance that took everything: her carefully arranged hair, her good dress, her straight spine, the slight tremor in her hands she couldn't quite control. His mouth, mobile and expressive where his father's was hard, curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Mrs. Stone?" he said, and there was mockery in it, subtle but unmistakable. "What a pleasure." He didn't bow, didn't offer his hand, just stood there in the doorway, 6 feet of trail-worn insolence, looking at her like she was a puzzle he'd already decided he didn't like the answer to. "Mr. Stone?" Lottie kept her voice level. "Welcome home. I hope your journey was bearable." "Long." He stepped into the room, moving with that same prowling grace she'd noticed from the window. Up close, he was even more unsettling, all sharp edges and barely leashed energy, a stark
contrast to Jeremiah's solid, controlled presence. But then, 6 years away tends to make for a long trip back. The words landed like an accusation. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "You must be hungry," Lottie said quickly. "Mrs. Chen has prepared lunch. If you'd like to wash up first?" "I'm fine." Wyatt's eyes hadn't left her face. "I'd rather get this over with." "Wyatt?" Jeremiah's voice carried a warning. "What?" Wyatt turned to his father, all false innocence. "I'm just saying I'm eager to sit down to a family meal. Isn't that what we're supposed to be now? A family?" The emphasis he put on the last word made it sound like something distasteful. Dinner was torture. They sat at the dining room table, the same table where Lottie and Jeremiah had shared 4 months of polite, quiet meals, but now the silence was different. It crackled with tension, thick enough to choke on. Jeremiah sat at the head of the table, Lottie to her right, Wyatt across from her. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread. The food might as well have been sawdust. Wyatt ate like he did everything else, with focused intensity, his movements economical and slightly too fast. He'd washed up but hadn't shaved, and the dark stubble on his jaw gave him a rakish, uncivilized look.
He changed into a clean shirt but left it open at the collar, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and tanned dark from the sun. Lottie kept her eyes on her plate and tried not to notice. "So," Wyatt said, breaking the silence with the same subtlety he'd used to break a window, "how long did you wait after Ma died before you started shopping for a replacement?" "Wyatt." "What? It's a fair question." He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the back, his posture deliberately insolent. His eyes found Lottie's across the table. "I'm just curious how these things work. Was there a waiting period? Did you advertise? Or did some matchmaker send you a catalog to choose from?" Heat flooded Lottie's face, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She met his eyes directly, refusing to flinch from whatever judgment she saw there.
"My father died of cholera," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "He was a doctor, a good one. He treated the poor and charged them nothing, and when he died, his estate consisted of debts and a single trunk of medical books. I had no family, no prospects, no means of support." She paused, holding Wyatt's gaze. "Your father offered me respect and security in exchange for managing his household. I accepted. If that makes me a gold digger in your estimation, Mr. Stone, then so be it. But I have never lied to your father about my circumstances, and I have never pretended this marriage was anything other than what it is, a practical arrangement between two people in need of something the other could provide." Silence fell, heavy as a fallen tree. Wyatt stared at her, something flickering in his expression, surprise, maybe, or unwilling respect. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The mockery had drained from his face, leaving something harder to read. "You've got spine, I'll give you that. Your approval is not required." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "No, ma'am, I don't suppose it is." Jeremiah cleared his throat. "Charlotte runs this household better than anyone since your mother passed. She's earned her place here, and she'll be treated with respect under this roof. That clear?" "Crystal." Wyatt's eyes hadn't left Lottie's face. She felt pinned by that stare, examined in ways that made her skin feel too tight. "My apologies, Mrs. Stone. That was out of line." "Accepted," Lottie said, though her heart was still racing. She reached for her water glass and realized her hand was trembling. She pulled it back, folding both hands in her lap instead. When she glanced up, she found Wyatt watching the gesture, his eyes tracking the movement with an intensity that made something low in her stomach twist uncomfortably. He looked away first, his jaw tightening. The rest of the meal passed in strained, near silence, broken only by the scrape of silverware and Jeremiah's attempts at neutral conversation. Questions about Wyoming, about the ranches where Wyatt had worked, about the trip south. Wyatt answered in brief sentences, his earlier hostility banked but not extinguished. Lottie ate mechanically, acutely aware of Wyatt's presence across the table, the way he moved, the way he breathed, the barely restrained energy that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a stove. He was nothing like his father. Where Jeremiah was controlled, measured, steady as stone, Wyatt was all restless motion and sharp edges, danger barely kept in check. She shouldn't find it compelling. She did anyway. When the meal finally ended, Jeremiah pushed back from the table. "I'll show you to your room, get you settled." "Still the same one?" "Never changed it." Something passed between them, understanding or pain or both. Wyatt nodded and stood, his chair scraping back. He was tall enough that Lottie had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes when he turned to her. "Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Stone," he said, and this time there was no mockery in it, just a strange, complicated weight. "It was good. You're welcome." He studied her for another moment, his brow furrowing slightly, like she was a problem he hadn't expected to encounter. Then he nodded once, sharp, decisive, and followed his father from the room. Lottie sat alone at the dining table, her hands still folded in her lap, her heart still beating too fast. Through the open doorway she could hear their boots on the stairs, Jeremiah's low voice, Wyatt's shorter responses. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the frantic flutter of her pulse beneath her palm. This is going to be a problem, she thought. Outside, the wind gusted, rattling the windows like something trying to get in. Chapter 4. The Storm. The sky turned green 3 days later. Lottie was hanging washing on the line behind the house when she first noticed it, that sickly, bruised color spreading across the western horizon like a stain. The wind had shifted, coming hot and strange, carrying the smell of electricity and something else, something primal, that made the horses in the corral stamp and whinny. The air felt thick, oppressive, like breathing through wet wool. Mrs. Chen came to the back door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Storm's coming," she said, her voice tight. "A bad one. You'd best get that washing in." Lottie was already pulling down the sheets, her hands working fast. The wind gusted harder, snapping the fabric like sails. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a low, ominous growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. By the time she made it back inside, arms full of half-dry laundry, the first drops had started to fall, fat and heavy, striking the dusty ground with audible impacts. Then the rain came in earnest, a wall of water that turned the world gray and roaring. Jeremiah burst through the front door, his hat streaming water. "Wyatt!" he shouted, and she heard boots thundering down the stairs. "I see it." Wyatt appeared, already pulling on his oilskin coat. His face was set, grim. "Northern pasture." "Near enough. Lightning hit the fence line, saw the smoke from the ridge. If the herd gets spooked and runs through the gap, we'll lose half of them in the ravines." Jeremiah was buckling his gun belt, his movements sharp with urgency. "Get the hands together. We need—" He stopped, his hand going to his side, his face going pale. "Pa?" Wyatt was across the room in 3 strides, catching his father's elbow. "What is it?" "Nothing. Just—" Jeremiah grimaced, pressing his hand harder against his ribs. "Pulled something this morning, moving feet. It's fine." "The hell it is. You can barely stand straight." Wyatt's jaw set. "You're staying here." "Like hell." "You'll be more liability than help, and you know it." Wyatt was already moving toward the door. "I'll take Hector and the boys. We'll get it done."
Lottie stepped forward. "I'm coming with you." Both men turned to stare at her. "No," Wyatt said flatly. "You need every hand you can get. Not yours. You'd be in the way." Something hot flared in Lottie's chest. She set down the laundry carefully, precisely, and looked Wyatt Stone dead in the eye. "I grew up on a farm in Ohio. I can ride, I can rope, and I'm not some porcelain doll that'll shatter in the rain." "This isn't a farm, princess. This is—" "Don't." Her voice cut sharp as a blade. "Don't you dare condescend to me. Your father needs help, and I'm offering it. You can either accept or waste time arguing while cattle run themselves to death in ravines." Silence, broken only by the hammering rain. Wyatt's eyes narrowed, that storm cloud blue darkening. She could see him calculating, weighing. "You do exactly what I say, when I say it. No questions, no arguments. You fall off your horse, you're on your own. We clear?" "Crystal." "Then get your gear, and for God's sakes, find something warmer than that dress." The rain was a solid thing, a physical force that stung exposed skin and turned the world into a gray blur. Lottie hunched in her saddle, the borrowed oilskin doing almost nothing against the deluge, her hat pulled low to keep the water from her eyes. Beneath her, the mare picked her way carefully through the mud that sucked at her hooves with every step. Lightning split the sky, turning everything white for a heartbeat. In that flash, she saw them, dark shapes milling in panicked confusion near the broken fence line, their eyes rolling white, their bodies steaming in the cold rain. Thunder followed, so loud it rattled in her chest. "There!" Wyatt's shout barely carried over the storm. He pointed toward the gap in the fence where smoke still rose despite the downpour. "Hector, you and Willis get that gap closed. Charlotte, with me." They rode hard toward the herd, the horses slipping and sliding in the mud. Lottie could hear the cattle now, bellowing, stamping, on the edge of full panic. Another lightning strike, closer this time, and they bolted. "Head 'em off!"
Wyatt was already spurring his horse forward, angling to cut them away from the ravines. "Turn him back toward the barn!" Lottie dug in her heels and followed. It was chaos. Pure, exhausting, terrifying chaos. The cattle were massive up close, all muscle and momentum and terror, and turning them was like trying to redirect a river with your bare hands. Lottie rode until her legs burned, and her hands were numb on the reins, shouting herself hoarse, waving her arms, using her horse to shoulder the stragglers back toward the main group. Mud splattered her face, rain ran down her neck, her clothes were soaked through, heavy as chainmail. She'd never felt more alive.
Through the rain, she caught glimpses of Wyatt, always moving, always in motion, his horse responding to the smallest shift of weight or pressure. He rode the way he did everything, with absolute confidence and zero hesitation, forcing the cattle to move through sheer will and skill. Even soaked and mud-spattered, there was something compelling about the way he commanded the space around him. A calf broke from the group, heading straight for the ravine edge. "I've got it!" Lottie kicked her horse forward before she could think better of it, angling to cut the calf off. The mare responded beautifully, surging through the mud, and for a moment Lottie thought they'd make it. The mare's front hoof caught in a hidden hole. The world tilted. Lottie had just enough time to kick free of the stirrups before she was flying, the ground rushing up to meet her with brutal force. She hit hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs, and then she was rolling, mud and grass and rain all mixing together. She came to a stop on her side, gasping, everything spinning. Hoofbeats, someone shouting her name. Hands grabbed her shoulders, rolling her onto her back. Wyatt's face appeared above her, rain streaming down his face, his eyes wild. "Are you hurt? Charlotte, answer me. Are you hurt?" She managed to drag in a breath. "Fine," she gasped. "I'm fine." "You damn fool." He hauled her upright, his hands hard on her arms. "I told you if you fell, you were on your own." "Then why?" Another breath, her ribs protesting. "Why'd you come back?" He didn't answer, just stared at her, his jaw working. Then he was pulling her to her feet, one arm around her waist, practically carrying her toward his horse. "We're done here," he said roughly. "Hector and the boys can finish. You're going back." "I can still—" "Like hell." He boosted her into his saddle, then swung up behind her, his arm tight around her waist. "Hold on." The ride to the nearest barn was a blur. Lottie sagged against Wyatt's chest, too exhausted to maintain dignity, feeling the solid warmth of him at her back, the strength in the arm that held her secure. Rain pounded down, thunder rolled, the world reduced to mud and motion and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them. Then they were inside, out of the rain, in the sudden shocking quiet of the old hay barn. Wyatt dismounted first, then pulled Lottie down after him. Her legs nearly buckled. She'd been riding for hours, every muscle screaming, but his hand steadied her, one on her waist, one on her arm. "Easy," he said, and his voice was different now, softer, almost gentle. The barn was dim, lit only by the gray light filtering through gaps in the walls. Rain hammered on the tin roof like 1,000 drums. The air smelled of hay and dust and wet horse, familiar and comforting. Wyatt led his horse to a stall, moving with the easy efficiency of long practice, then turned back to Lottie.
She was shivering. Now that the adrenaline was fading, the cold was setting in, bone-deep, teeth-chattering cold. Her soaked clothes clung to her like a second skin. Her hair had come loose, hanging in wet ropes down her back. "You need to get out of those wet things," Wyatt said, shrugging out of his oilskin. Beneath it, his shirt was only slightly less soaked, clinging to his shoulders and chest. "There's some horse blankets in the tack room. They're clean enough." "I'm fine." "You're shaking so hard I can hear your teeth rattle. Don't be stubborn." "Pot, meat, kettle." The corner of his mouth twitched, that almost smile she was learning to recognize. He disappeared into the tack room and emerged with a rough wool blanket. "Turn around." "I can turn around." She did, her fingers fumbling with the buttons of her soaked shirt. They wouldn't cooperate, stiff and slippery and impossible. She heard Wyatt make a frustrated sound, then his hands were there, brushing hers aside. "Let me." His fingers worked the buttons with surprising dexterity. Impersonal and efficient, but Lottie felt every touch like a brand. When he reached the last button, his knuckles brushed the skin of her collarbone and she gasped. He froze. The rain hammered on. The horse shifted in its stall. Neither of them moved. "Charlotte," Wyatt said, and his voice was rough, strained. "You need to step away from me right now." She should. She knew she should. Instead, she turned to face him. He was closer than she'd realized, close enough that she could see the water droplets caught in his dark lashes, the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with harsh, uneven breaths. His eyes had gone dark, storm blue and turbulent, and the way he was looking at her made her feel stripped bare. "You scared the hell out of me," he said, low and fierce. "When I saw you go down, I'm all right. You could have been killed, broken your neck, been trampled." His hands came up to frame her face, his palms rough and warm against her cold skin. "Don't you understand? You could have—" He stopped, swallowed hard. His eyes dropped to her mouth. The air between them changed, thickened, became something else entirely, like the storm still raging outside. Lottie's breath caught. She watched, mesmerized, as Wyatt's head lowered slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. His breath ghosted across her lips, warm and real. "We can't," she whispered, but she didn't move. "I know. Your father. I know."
Another inch closer. She could smell him now. Rain and leather and something uniquely him. Something that made her want to lean in, to close that final distance, to— Wyatt jerked back like he'd been burned. He stumbled backward 2 steps, his hands dropping, his expression shocked. "Jesus," he breathed. "Jesus Christ, what am I—" He turned away sharply, running both hands through his wet hair, his shoulders rigid. Lottie stood frozen, the blanket clutched to her chest, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Her lips tangled where his breath had touched. Her skin felt too tight, too hot despite the cold. "Wyatt!" "Don't!" His voice was raw. "Don't say anything. That was—I shouldn't have—" He drew in a shaking breath. "You're my father's wife. That makes you untouchable. That makes this—" He gestured sharply between them. "This, whatever the hell this is, it can't happen. It won't happen." Lottie wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, trying to stop the shaking that had nothing to do with cold anymore. "I know." "Do you?" He turned back to face her, and the anguish in his expression nearly broke her. "Because I don't think you do. I don't think you understand what I almost—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "My father's a good man. He doesn't deserve—" "I know," she said again, more firmly. "You're right. This can't happen." They stared at each other across the dim barn, the rain still hammering above them, the air between them still crackling with everything unsaid, everything impossible. "I'll wait outside," Wyatt said finally, turning toward the door. "Give you privacy to change." "The rain." "I don't care about the rain." He walked out into the storm without looking back, leaving Lottie alone in the barn with the smell of wet hay and the memory of his hands on her face and the terrible, growing certainty that something had shifted, something that couldn't be shifted back. Outside, the thunder rolled on. Chapter 5. The Forbidden. The storm passed, but it left things changed. The morning after, Lottie woke to birdsong and sunlight streaming through her window, achingly normal sounds after the violence of the night before. Her body ached everywhere, shoulders, thighs, ribs where she'd hit the ground. But it was the ache in her chest that kept her lying in bed longer than she should, staring at the ceiling, replaying those moments in the barn. His hands on her face, his breath on her lips, the way he looked at her like she was both salvation and damnation. "You're my father's wife. That makes you untouchable. That makes this—" He gestured sharply between them. "This, whatever the hell this is, it can't happen. It won't happen." Lottie wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, trying to stop the shaking that had nothing to do with cold anymore. "I know." "Do you?" He turned back to face her, and the anguish in his expression nearly broke her. "Because I don't think you do. I don't think you understand what I almost—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "My father's a good man. He doesn't deserve—" "I know," she said again more firmly. "You're right. This can't happen." They stared at each other across the dim barn, the rain still hammering above them, the air between them still crackling with everything unsaid, everything impossible. "I'll wait outside," Wyatt said finally, turning toward the door. "Give you privacy to change." "The rain." "I don't care about the rain." He walked out into the storm without looking back, leaving Lottie alone in the barn with the smell of wet hay and the memory of his hands on her face and the terrible, growing certainty that something had shifted, something that couldn't be shifted back. Outside, the thunder rolled on.
She'd married for security, yes, for survival, but she'd also married with the understanding that she would honor her vows, even if they were vows born of necessity rather than love. Jeremiah had been nothing but kind to her, decent. He'd given her a home, asked for nothing in return, treated her with respect when he could have demanded much more, and she'd almost betrayed him with his own son. The shame of it sat heavy as stones in her stomach. Lottie dressed slowly, braiding her hair with trembling fingers. She would be better. She would keep her distance from Wyatt, avoid him when possible, maintain the careful walls of propriety that had cracked in that barn. She would remember her duty. She would not think about how his thumb had felt against her cheekbone. She went downstairs determined, armored in resolve. Wyatt was in the kitchen. He stood at the stove with his back to her, sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee into a tin cup. The morning light through the window turned his hair to dark fire and threw his shadow long across the floor. He must have heard her footsteps because his shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. "Morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Good morning." Lottie's voice came out steadier than she felt. She moved to the sideboard, putting the width of the kitchen between them, and busied herself with slicing bread. The knife made small, precise sounds against the cutting board. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "How's your father?" she asked, because she had to say something. "Better. Resting." Wyatt still hadn't turned around. "Mrs. Chin's with him. Says he'll be fine in a few days if he doesn't do anything stupid." "That's good." "Yeah." More silence. The knife kept moving. Thunk, thunk. "Charlotte, don't." She said it quickly, sharply, before he could finish. "Please don't." She heard him exhale, long and slow, then the scrape of his cup being set down on the counter too hard. "We need to talk about what happened." Nothing happened. The hell it didn't. Lottie's hand stilled on the bread knife. She forced herself to look at him, to meet those storm-blue eyes that had haunted her dreams. He turned to face her now, his expression stark, his jaw tight. "Nothing happened," she repeated, more firmly. "You walked away, we both walked away. That's all." "Is it?" He took a step toward her, then caught himself, his hands flexing at his sides. "Because it sure as hell doesn't feel like nothing." "Then you'll have to learn to make it feel that way." Her voice was sharp now, defensive. "Because anything else is impossible, and you know it."
"I know." The words came out rough, ragged. "God help me, I know." They stared at each other across the kitchen, the morning sunlight making everything too bright, too clear. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the shadows under his eyes that said he'd slept as poorly as she had. Could see the way his hands clenched and unclenched, like he was physically restraining himself from crossing the space between them. "I was wrong about you," Wyatt said suddenly. "That first day, what I said at dinner. I was wrong." Lottie's breath caught. "Wyatt, you're not a gold digger. You're not using him. You're just—" He stopped, his throat working. "You're just trying to survive, like the rest of us, and I'm sorry I made you feel like that was something shameful." Tears pricked at Lottie's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you. That means—" Her voice cracked. "That means more than you know." "I should go," but he didn't move. "I should pack my things and ride out today. Go back to Wyoming or Montana or, hell, anywhere that isn't here." "Why don't you?" The question hung between them, heavy with all the things they couldn't say.
Because he's my father, Wyatt said finally, and I've already wasted 6 years being stubborn and prideful. I came back to make things right with him. I can't leave now, not when we're just starting to—" He broke off, his jaw clenching. "But staying here, seeing you every day, knowing that I can't—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Lottie set down the bread knife carefully, precisely, before her shaking hands could drop it. "Then we'll have to be careful. We'll have to—" She drew a shaky breath. "We'll have to stay away from each other." "How?" The word was almost a plea. "This is his house. You live here. I live here. How am I supposed to sit across from you at dinner every night and pretend I don't—" He stopped again, his hands fisting in his hair. "This is killing me, Charlotte. Don't call me that." "What?" "My name. Don't—" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm kitchen. "Just killing me, Charlotte. Don't call me that." "What?" "My name. Don't—" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm kitchen. "Don't call me that, Charlotte. When you say it like that, it sounds like— Like what?" "Like it means something. Like I mean something. It doesn't matter." She straightened her spine, drawing on every ounce of dignity she possessed. "You're right. We need distance. We'll be civil at meals for your father's sake, but otherwise we stay away from each other. We don't talk. We don't—" Her voice wavered. "We don't have conversations like this." Wyatt stared at her, something raw and painful in his expression. Then he nodded, sharp and final. "If that's what you want, it's what has to be." "That's not the same thing." No, it wasn't.
The back door opened and Mrs. Chen bustled in, her arms full of eggs from the hen house. She stopped when she saw them, her dark eyes moving from Wyatt to Lottie and back again, taking in the tension crackling between them like summer lightning. "Breakfast will be ready soon," she said carefully. "Mr. Stone is asking for you, Wyatt. Says he wants to discuss the fence repairs." "I'll go to him." Wyatt moved toward the door, giving Lottie a wide berth, as if even passing too close might break whatever fragile control they'd managed. At the doorway, he paused. "Mrs. Stone." The formality of it hurt worse than any insult he'd thrown at her that first night. Then he was gone, his boots striking the floor as he headed toward his father's room, leaving Lottie standing in the bright kitchen with the smell of coffee and the taste of guilt and the terrible certainty that distance wouldn't help, that nothing would help, that this thing between them had taken root too deep to be pulled out. Mrs. Chen set down her basket of eggs and came to stand beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "This is a problem," the older woman said finally. Lottie couldn't even pretend to misunderstand. "Yes. The young Mr. Stone, he looks at you the way his father should look at you, but doesn't. Mrs. Chen, I know." Mrs. Chen's hand came to rest on her shoulder, surprisingly gentle. "You are a good woman. You have a good heart. But sometimes good hearts make bad choices when they are lonely too long." Lottie pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back the sob that wanted to escape. "What do I do?" "You remember why you were here. You remember what you promised." Mrs. Chen squeezed her shoulder once, then let go. "And you pray that time makes it easier. Though in my experience," she paused, something sad and knowing in her expression, "in my experience, it rarely does." The days that followed were torture. The Texas sun returned with a vengeance, burning away the last traces of the storm, turning the mud back to dust. The ranch settled into its routines. Jeremiah recovered, returning to his work with his usual steady determination. The cattle were counted, the fences repaired. Life went on. And through it all, Lottie and Wyatt circled each other like wary animals, maintaining careful distance, speaking only when necessary, their conversations brief and painfully polite. But awareness was a living thing. Lottie felt it every time they were in the same room, a magnetic pull that made her skin prickle and her breath come short. She'd look up from her sewing to find him watching her from across the parlor, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark.
She'd reach for the salt at dinner, and their fingers would brush, and the electricity would send electricity racing up her arm.
At night, lying in her lonely bed, she could hear his footsteps in the room down the hall, restless, pacing, the sounds of a man who couldn't sleep, and she would press her pillow over her face and try not to imagine what it would feel like to go to him, to knock on his door, to give in to this impossible thing that was consuming them both. She thought about Jeremiah, kind, distant Jeremiah, who trusted her, who'd given her a home and asked for nothing, who sat across from her at meals and talked about cattle prices and weather and never seemed to notice the way his son's eyes tracked her every movement. The guilt was a constant weight, heavy as iron around her neck. One evening, a week after the storm, Lottie stood on the back porch watching the sunset. The sky was on fire, orange and red and purple bleeding together, the kind of sunset that only happened in Texas, vast and impossible and heartbreaking. She heard the screen door creak behind her, but didn't turn. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Wyatt's voice was quiet, careful. "Yes." He came to stand beside her, not touching, leaving a careful foot of space between them. But she felt his presence like heat from a fire, warming her side, making her want to lean into it. "I'm leaving," he said. Lottie's heart stopped. "What?" "Tomorrow, early. I've talked to Pa. Told him there's work up in the Panhandle, a ranch that needs help with a difficult herd. It's not true, but—" He exhaled roughly. "I need to go, Charlotte, before I do something we'll both regret." She should be relieved. She should be grateful. Instead, she felt like the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. "For how long?" "I don't know. Long enough." He turned to look at her finally, and the naked longing in his face nearly broke her. "You were right. Distance is the only answer. I can't be around you and not want—" His hands gripped the porch railing, white-knuckled. "I'm not strong enough for that." "Wyatt, don't ask me to stay." His voice was rough, desperate. "Please, Charlotte, don't ask me to stay." The words she wanted to say clogged in her throat. "Stay, please stay. I can't bear it if you leave." But she couldn't say them, wouldn't, because he was right. Distance was mercy. Distance was the only thing that might save them both. "Safe travels," she whispered. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Yeah." Then he turned and walked back into the house, the screen door slapping shut behind him, and Lottie stood alone on the porch watching the beautiful, terrible sunset and feeling something inside her crack clean through. Tomorrow he would leave. Tomorrow she would be safe. Tomorrow this ache in her chest would start to fade. She told herself these things and tried to believe them. The stars came out one by one, cold and distant and uncaring, and somewhere in the darkness a coyote called, lonely as a prayer.
Chapter 6. The Departure. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Lottie woke before dawn to the sound of movement downstairs, boots on wood, the low murmur of male voices, the creak of the front door. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling going gray with approaching light, and listened to Wyatt preparing to leave her life. She should stay here, should let him go without seeing him, without making it harder than it already was. The kindest thing would be to pretend she was still asleep, to spare them both another impossible conversation. But she couldn't. She dressed quickly in the dim light, not bothering with her hair beyond a simple braid, and went downstairs in her bare feet, silent as a ghost. They were in the entry hall, Wyatt with his saddlebag slung over his shoulder, his hat in his hand, and Jeremiah standing stiff and formal in his work clothes, his face carefully composed. Father and son, facing each other again across that same invisible distance, only this time it was Wyatt choosing to go. "You're right," Jeremiah said. It wasn't quite a question, but almost. "When I can." Wyatt shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I'll send word when I'm settled. The Panhandle's rough country this time of year. I've worked rougher." Silence fell between them, heavy with all the things they couldn't say, all the years they'd lost and were losing again. Lottie watched from the stairs, her hand on the banister, her heart breaking for both of them. Son, Jeremiah's voice cracked, just slightly. He cleared his throat. You just got back. If this is about what happened before, about the things we said, it's not about that. Wyatt's jaw tightened. We're good, Pa. We are. I need to keep moving for a while. You understand? No, Jeremiah said quietly. No, I don't. But I won't stop you. I learned that lesson once already. He held out his hand. You take care of yourself. Wyatt looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then pulled his father into a rough embrace, quick and fierce, and over too soon. When they separated, both their faces were carefully blank, emotion locked down tight. I'll be back, Wyatt said. Just need some time. You know where home is. Wyatt nodded, not trusting his voice. Then his eyes lifted and found Lottie on the stairs. The air went out of the room. Jeremiah followed his son's gaze, his expression shifting to something gentler. I'll see to your horse, he said, and moved toward the door with the tact of a man who recognized a goodbye when he saw one. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving them alone. Wyatt and Lottie stared at each other across the dim entry hall. You didn't have to come down, Wyatt said finally. I know. Would have been easier if you hadn't. I know that too.
He set down his saddlebags, but made no move to come closer. The space between them felt vast as the plains outside, and just as empty. The grandfather clock ticked in the silence. Tick, tock, counting down the moments they had left. I want you to know, Wyatt said, his voice low and rough, that leaving isn't about you being. It's not because I don't. He stopped, frustrated, running a hand through his hair. Hell, I'm no good with words. You're leaving because you have to, Lottie said softly, because staying would destroy everything. I understand. Do you? He took one step toward her, then stopped himself. Because I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure I understand how I can know someone for less than 2 weeks and feel like, his hands fisted at his sides, like leaving them is going to tear something vital out of me. Tears burned behind Lottie's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. Wyatt, if I stay, I will destroy this family. The words came out harsh, final. I'll destroy the peace my father's found. I'll ruin your reputation. I'll dishonor everything my mother taught me about what it means to be a decent man. He drew a shaking breath. And God help me, Charlotte. I'll do it anyway if I stay. Because I'm not strong enough to be near you and not want things I have no right to want. You're running. Yes. No shame in it, just stark honesty. I'm running because it's the only way I know to do the right thing. Lottie descended the stairs slowly, each step taking her close at him, to this man she barely knew and somehow knew better than anyone. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the exhaustion in his face, the pain he was trying so hard to hide, close enough to reach out and touch him. She didn't. I need you to know something, she said, her voice steady despite the way her heart was shattering. You're not a bad man for feeling this way. Neither of us are bad people. We're just, she swallowed hard. We're just people who met at the wrong time in the wrong way. That's all. Doesn't make it hurt less. No, it doesn't. They stood there in the gray dawn light, not touching, not daring to close that final distance. The clock ticked. Outside, she could hear Jeremiah moving around, giving them privacy, giving them time. Will you be all right? Here, with him. Will you be all right? Yes, he's a good man. He doesn't deserve you. Neither do you. Wyatt's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, sad and knowing. That's the God-honest truth. He picked up his saddlebags, settling them on his shoulder. Goodbye, Charlotte. Not to see you later, not until next time. Just goodbye. Final as a closing door. Goodbye, Wyatt. He turned toward the door, his hand on the knob, and paused. For a heartbeat, she thought he might turn back, might say something more, might cross that distance between them and to hell with the consequences. But he didn't. The door opened and the morning light flooded in, bright and harsh and unforgiving. Wyatt stepped through it without looking back, and then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a sound like a coffin lid falling shut. Lottie stood alone in the entry hall, her arms wrapped around herself,
and listened to the sounds of his departure. The creak of saddle leather, the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to his father, the strike of hooves on hard-packed earth. She went to the parlor window and looked out, just like she'd done that first day, watching a stranger arrive and change everything. Wyatt swing into the saddle with easy grace, settling his hat low on his head. He said something to Jeremiah, too quiet for her to hear, and Jeremiah clasped his shoulder once, hard. A father's blessing, a father's goodbye. Then Wyatt turned his horse toward the gate and rode. Lottie watched him grow smaller, watched him become a silhouette against the rising sun, watched him fade into the distance until he was nothing but a dark speck on the horizon, and then nothing at all. The land swallowed him whole, vast and empty and indifferent, the same way it swallowed everything eventually. She stood at the window long after he'd disappeared, staring at that empty horizon, remembering how she'd felt arriving here, lost, alone, uncertain. She'd thought she'd found safety, security, a place to survive. She hadn't expected to find something worth more than survival. And now it was gone. Behind her, the grandfather clock struck 7. Bong, bong, bong. Each chime echoed through the empty house, marking time, marking loss, marking the moment when something precious slipped through her fingers like water. Jeremiah came to stand beside her at the window. He didn't speak, just looked out at the same empty horizon, his face weathered and sad. "He'll be back," he said finally. "When he's ready. Wyatt always comes back." Lottie nodded because her voice had gone missing. "He's a good boy," Jeremiah continued, more to himself than to her. "Stubborn as hell, too much pride, can't sit still to save his life. But he's good underneath it all. His mother's son, through and through." "I'm sure he is," Lottie managed. Jeremiah glanced at her, something complicated in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or resignation, or both. He said quietly, "Life's funny sometimes, the way things work out, or don't work out, as the case may be." She looked at him sharply, her heart stuttering, but his face gave nothing away. He just patted her shoulder once, awkwardly, the way he might pat a good horse, and turned to go. "I've got work to see to. Mrs. Chen will have breakfast ready soon, if you're hungry."
Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the empty horizon and the ticking clock and the hollow feeling spreading through her chest like winter frost. The days that followed were gray. Not literally, the Texas sun still blazed overhead, merciless and bright, but everything felt muted, drained of color, like looking at the world through dirty glass. Lottie went through the motions of her life, managing the household, planning meals, keeping the accounts, attending church on Sunday with Jeremiah at her side. She smiled when appropriate, spoke when spoken to, performed her duties with the same careful competence she always had, but inside she felt hollow. The house echoed worse than before. Every creak of the floorboards reminded her of his footsteps. Every meal at the big dining table made her aware of the empty chair across from her, the chair where he'd sat and challenged her and looked at her like she was worth defending. At night, lying in her bed, she no longer heard his restless pacing down the hall, and the silence was somehow worse than the sound had been. She missed him. It was absurd, ridiculous. She'd known him barely 2 weeks, and half of that time he'd been hostile or distant or deliberately avoiding her. But she missed him anyway, missed his intensity, his sharp edges, the way he looked at her like she was real instead of just convenient, missed the feeling of being seen, of mattering to someone in a way that had nothing to do with duty or obligation or carefully negotiated transactions. Jeremiah was kind as always, patient. He asked her opinion on ranch matters, complimented her cooking, bought her a new shawl when the weather turned cool. He was everything a husband should be in theory. But he wasn't what she wanted, and the guilt of that knowledge sat like lead in her stomach. One evening, 2 weeks after Wyatt's departure, Lottie stood on the back porch watching the sunset,
The same porch where Wyatt had told her he was leaving, where the sky had been on fire and her heart had broken. The sunset tonight was just as beautiful, just as vast and impossible, but there was no one beside her to see it. Mrs. Chen came to the door, drying her hands on her apron. "You should eat something, Mrs. Stone. You're getting too thin." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You haven't been fine since he left." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "Grief is grief, child, whether you have a right to it or not." Lottie's throat tightened. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Mrs. Chen came to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the darkening land. "And I think Mr. Stone knows too, though he's too much a gentleman to say so." "Mrs. Chen." "Sometimes," the older woman said softly, "it's the bravest thing to let go of what we think we should want and reach for what we actually need, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. And if reaching for it hurts other people,
Then you have to decide which hurt you can live with." Mrs. Chen squeezed her shoulder. "But standing still and hurting forever, that's not noble, Mrs. Stone. That's just slow death." She went back inside, leaving Lottie alone with the sunset and the empty horizon and a truth she wasn't ready to face. The stars came out, one by one, and somewhere far away on some distant ranch under the same vast sky, Wyatt Stone was looking up at the same stars and feeling the same hollow ache. The distance between them stretched like a wound that wouldn't heal. Chapter 7. The Sacrifice and Resolution. 3 weeks after Wyatt left, Jeremiah found her on the back porch at sunset. Lottie didn't hear him approach. She was too lost in the horizon and the memory of a figure on horseback disappearing into the distance, and the weight of grief she had no right to feel. Tears tracked down her face, silent, persistent, beyond her control. She'd stopped trying to hold them back when she was alone. "Charlotte?" She startled, her hand flying to her face to swipe away the evidence, but it was too late. He'd seen. Jeremiah stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, his weathered face unreadable. He didn't come closer, didn't invade her space, just watched her with those pale gray eyes that saw more than she'd ever given him credit for. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice rough. "I was just, the sunset was—" "Don't." His voice was quiet but firm. "Don't apologize and don't lie to me. You've never lied to me before. Don't start now." Lottie's breath caught. She turned to face him fully, her hands twisting in her skirt. "Jeremiah." "I'm not blind, Charlotte." He stepped out onto the porch, moving slowly, like approaching a spooked horse. "I've seen the way you look at that horizon, same way you looked at it the day he left, same way you've looked at it every day since." Shame flooded through her, hot and bitter. "I'm so sorry. I never meant. I've tried to—" "I know." He came to stand beside her at the railing, both of them looking out at the darkening land. "I saw you two, the day of the storm. I came looking, worried about you both. Found the barn." He paused, his jaw working. "Saw you through the gap in the boards. Saw the way he held your face, the way you looked at him." Lottie's knees went weak. She gripped the railing to keep from falling. "Nothing happened. I swear to you, nothing." "I know that too." His voice was sad, but not angry. "I saw him walk away. Saw the way he tore himself away from you, like it was killing him. That's how I knew." "Knew what?" "That my son loves you, and that you love him back."
The words hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. Lottie opened her mouth to protest, to deny it, but what came out was a sob, raw and broken and true. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted. I tried so hard not to." "Hush now." Jeremiah's hand came to rest on her shoulder, gentle and fatherly. "This isn't your fault. It's not anyone's fault. It just is." "But I married you. I made vows. You made a business arrangement." His voice was matter-of-fact, almost kind. "That's all it ever was, Charlotte. I needed someone to run my household. You needed security. Those were the terms. We both knew it." "That doesn't make it right." "No," he agreed, "but it doesn't make it love either." Lottie turned to look at him. really look at him, and saw something in his face she'd never noticed before. A deep, bone-tired loneliness that mirrored her own. A man who'd built a kingdom out of hard country, but had forgotten how to live in it. "I don't understand," she whispered. Jeremiah sighed, the sound carrying years of regret. "My wife, Wyatt's mother, she was the love of my life. 23 years we had together before the fever took her. When she died, something in me died too." He looked down at his weathered hands. "I thought I could replace that. Thought if I had someone in the house again, someone to manage things, to sit across from at meals, that maybe the emptiness would go away. But it doesn't work that way. You can't bargain your way out of grief." "Jeremiah!" "You're a good woman, Charlotte. You've been kinder to me than I deserved. But I see you now, really see you, and I understand something I should have understood from the start." He turned to face her fully. "You deserve more than this half-life I've given you. You deserve to be loved, not just provided for, to be wanted, not just useful." Tears streamed down Lottie's face unchecked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm releasing you from our agreement." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Annulment papers. I had them drawn up in town last week. The marriage was never consummated, so the church will grant it. You will be free." Lottie stared at the papers like they might bite. I can't." "You can, and you will, because I wanted a wife, Charlotte, but I won't keep a prisoner, and that's what you become, isn't it? A prisoner of duty and obligation and misplaced honor." "Where would I even go?" The question came out small, lost. "To him." Jeremiah's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but was close. "To my stubborn, prideful, big-hearted son who rode out of here like the devil was on his heels because he was too honorable to take what he wanted." "I don't know where he is." "Panhandle region, ranch called the Broken Spur outside of Amarillo. I got a letter 3 days ago." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "He's working horses. Sounds miserable. Mentions the weather a lot." His eyes met hers, knowing and sad. "He doesn't mention you once, which is how I know you're all he's thinking about."
Lottie took the letter with shaking hands. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I love my son, and because," his voice roughened, "because once, a long time ago, I loved a woman the way Wyatt loves you, with everything I had, and I got 23 blessed years with her before she was taken from me." He squeezed her shoulder. "My boy deserves that kind of happiness, and so do you." "But what about you? What about—" "I'll be fine. I've got the ranch, got Mrs. Chen fussing over me, got my work." He stepped back, his expression settling into something peaceful. "And I'll have the satisfaction of knowing I did one thing right in all this mess. I let go when I should have. I gave my son the chance I took from him by being too selfish to see what was right in front of me." Lottie couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She just stood there, clutching the papers and the letter, her whole world tilting on its axis. "There's money in the house safe," Jeremiah continued, "practical, even now. Enough to get you to Amarillo and set you up comfortable for a while if things don't work out the way I think they will." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Stage leaves for Amarillo day after tomorrow at dawn. Mrs. Chan will help you pack."
"Jeremiah!"
Her voice broke on his name. "Thank you for everything, for—" "Don't thank me yet." He looked back at her, and there was something like humor in his eyes. "You've got to go catch him first, and Wyatt's always been fast on his feet." Then he was gone, leaving her alone on the porch with annulment papers and a letter, and a choice that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The stage to Amarillo rattled over rough roads for 2 days. Lottie sat by the window, her small bag at her feet, the annulment papers tucked safely in her bodice. She watched the landscape change, the familiar scrub and mesquite giving way to higher plains, the sky impossibly vast overhead. With every mile she felt the weight lifting, the obligation, the guilt, the sense of being trapped in a life that didn't fit. She was still scared, still uncertain, but beneath the fear was something else, something that felt like hope, fragile and new as spring grass.
The Broken Spur Ranch was smaller than the Stone Ranch, rougher around the edges, built for work rather than show. Lottie climbed down from the hired wagon, her legs stiff from travel, and looked around at the weathered buildings, the corrals full of horses, the distant figures of ranch hands going about their business. "Help you, ma'am?" A man approached, older, bow-legged, squinting at her in the late afternoon sun. "I'm looking for Wyatt Stone. I was told he works here." The man's eyebrows rose. "Wyatt, huh? Yeah, he's here. Down at the breaking pen with a Mustang that's meaner than sin." He pointed toward the corral at the edge of the property. "Fair warning, ma'am. He's not in the best of moods. That horse has been making his life difficult for 3 days straight." "Thank you." Lottie picked up her bag and walked toward the corral, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears.
She saw the horse first, a beautiful buckskin stallion, wild-eyed and fighting the rope, tossing its head and stamping. Then she saw Wyatt. He was in the corral, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cooling evening air, his hat gone, his dark hair falling in his eyes. He moved with the horse, patient and steady, his voice low and soothing, gentling the animal with nothing but time and persistence and quiet confidence. He looked thinner, tired, like he hadn't been sleeping. He looked perfect. Lottie set down her bag and gripped the corral fence, watching him work, drinking in the sight of him after weeks of emptiness, the way he moved, the sound of his voice, the stubborn set of his shoulders as he refused to give up on the difficult horse. One of the ranch hands noticed her and called out, "Wyatt, you got a visitor!" Wyatt looked up, irritated, ready to dismiss whoever it was, and froze. The rope went slack in his hands. The horse danced away, forgotten. He stared at her like she was a mirage, a trick of the light, something that couldn't possibly be real. Charlotte! Her name came out hoarse, disbelieving. She couldn't speak, could only nod, her hands white-knuckled on the fence. Wyatt vaulted over the corral fence in one fluid motion, closing the distance between them in long strides. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to touch but not touching, his chest heaving, his eyes searching her face like he was trying to solve an impossible equation. "What are you doing here?" His voice was rough, almost angry. "Why are you... You should be... He released me." The words tumbled out, urgent and breathless. "Jeremiah, he gave me annulment papers. He knew Wyatt. He saw us in the barn, and he knew, and he..." She fumbled in her bodice for the papers, pulling them out with shaking hands. "He set me free." Wyatt stared at the papers, then at her, his expression shifting through shock and disbelief and something that might have been hope, dangerous and desperate. "You came here," he said slowly, like he was afraid the words might break the spell. "You came all this way." "Of course I did." Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling now, couldn't stop smiling. "Did you really think I'd let you run off to the panhandle and work yourself to death over some misguided sense of honor?" "Wyatt, I love you." The words burst out of her, reckless and true. "I love you, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. I'm tired of being dutiful and proper and doing the right thing when the right thing feels like dying. So, if you meant any of what you said, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel..." She didn't get to finish. Wyatt closed the distance between them and kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't tentative, it was fierce and desperate and full of weeks of wanting, of longing, of holding back. His hands came up to frame her face, his calloused palms rough against her skin, and he kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. Lottie melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with everything she had. He tasted like dust and sweat and freedom. He felt solid and real and right in a way nothing else in her life had ever felt. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, Wyatt pressed his forehead to hers.
"I love you," he said, the words falling from his lips like a confession.
God help me, I've loved you since you stood up to me at that first dinner and refused to be intimidated. I've loved you through every impossible, torturous day since. Then stop running. She pulled back just enough to see his face. Stop running and build something with me. Something real. Something that isn't a bargain or an arrangement or a compromise. Something true, he said, and his smile was sunlight breaking through clouds. Yes. He kissed her again, softer this time, sweeter, full of promise instead of desperation. Around them, the ranch hands had stopped working to watch, some grinning, some whistling, all of them witnessing this moment of two people finally reaching for what they needed. When they broke apart again, Wyatt kept her close, his arms around her waist, his eyes bright with something that looked like joy. "What do we do now?" Lottie asked. "Now?" Wyatt glanced back at the corral, at the buckskin stallion watching them with intelligent eyes. "Now I've finished gentling that damn horse. Then we find a preacher. Then," he looked down at her, his expression fierce and tender, "then we start living, really living. No more bargains, no more running, just us and whatever we can build together." "That sounds perfect." "It won't be easy. I'm not a rich man, Charlotte. I don't have a ranch or—" "I don't care." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his beard under her palm. "I didn't come here for security. I came here for you." His arms tightened around her. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you don't regret it." "I won't." She was certain of it, certain in a way she'd never been certain of anything. "I love you, Wyatt Stone." "I love you too, Charlotte Hale." He paused, his eyes dancing. Soon to be Charlotte Stone. Again, but different this time. Very different. He kissed her once more, then tucked her against his side, both of them looking out at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors, orange and pink and gold, the whole world on fire with possibility. The land stretched out before them, vast and open and free, no longer oppressive, no longer empty, just open, full of promise and future and all the room in the world to grow. "Welcome home," Wyatt said softly, and for the first time in a very long time, Lottie felt like she was. The end.
Dear listeners of Light Romantic Stories, thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments what city you're listening from. We'd love to hear from you.